Welcome everybody to the MaCCI EPOS Fireside Talk, today with Natalia Fabra. The topic of our conversation is war and climate change, challenges to electricity markets. And with Natalia, we have a great expert on the economics of electricity markets. Natalia is professor of economics at Universidad Carlos III in Madrid, and principal investigator of the ERC Consolidator project, Electric Challenges. Well, she worked a lot on the analysis of electricity markets as an academic, as well as providing advice in policy making. She's research fellow of the CPR, associate member of the Toulouse School of Economics. Natalia is around for a while in academics. She obtained her PhD in 2001 at the EUI, European University Institute in Florence, and has not been stopping since. And well, the topic, well, we have a lot of challenges to electricity markets in particular, and I guess when you were started to work on, you were not fully anticipating the war and its challenges for electricity markets, but you were actually early, so that's a report and a nice story about you. So in April 2021, you were looking at the data about gas storage in Europe, and saw that something really strange was happening. Usually in the summer and the spring and summer, these gas storages were filling up, but the facilities that were owned by Gazprom, the Russian energy company, these were exceptionally low, so something strange was happening. And well, so now we have the war and the challenges. We continue to have the climate change challenges, energy transition. So these are major challenges, I guess, for politics more broadly, but today we won't cover the world, but focus on energy markets and in particular electricity markets. Now, the ongoing process, I guess, in the EU is what can be called at least the attempt of a decarbonization process to emit less carbon, and perhaps it might be a good idea for us as the audience that you, Natalia, remind us what are actually those targets, those goals set by the EU for it and its member states.
So let me start by thanking you, Martin, for organizing this. I think it's a wonderful initiative to share our thoughts on what we work on a daily basis. As you said, in my case, it's energy, but it's also climate, it's also competition. I think the nice feature of this field is that it's really a melting pot of many different types of expertise that come together to hopefully help out in the challenge of fighting climate change on the one hand, but also fighting inflation or energy price induced inflation. You mentioned before I go to respond your question regarding the European targets, let me nevertheless share with you this information. You mentioned the fact that well before February 24th, when the war started, weird things were happening in energy markets already, well before that. And let me share with you this information that I was looking at when I started becoming really worried about what was happening, and we didn't really know what it was until the war exploded. So here in this figure, on the left-hand side, you can see gas storage. So typically gas storage has a strong seasonal component. So dotted line there that shows how full the gas storage is. So typically we consume gas during the winter, so it goes down, and then we start storing gas to be ready for the next winter. So what you can see here is that when we look at the storage facilities, for instance, in 2021, that is well before the war, already at the end of the spring, when we would have expected an increase in the storage, the gas stored in the storage facilities, we were really touching even below the historical minimum. So these two bands, they represent the max and the mean in historical terms. So we really were, doing very badly in terms of how much gas we were storing in total in Europe. But if you focus on the gas storage facilities owned by Gazprom, now it's incredible that we allowed Gazprom to own essential facilities such as gas storage in Europe, but that was the case before the war. Indeed, what Gazprom was doing was what every monopoly does: withhold output, do not fill up the storage. So as you can see, this pink line essentially means that they were not filling up the storage facilities. And if you look at imports from Russia, or in other words, how much gas Russia was exporting to Europe, again, we were below the historical minimum. And that was already 2022. So really, Russia, using Gazprom as its tool, was getting prepared for the war. It was withholding gas. It was removing gas from Europe in an attempt to increase gas prices. And this is really what we saw. Whereas the war starts somewhere around here, gas prices started increasing well beyond that. And this is why I say that energy markets are fascinating, because it's where competition, energy, climate, environmental economics meet. This is a clear example of exercise of market power with a clear attempt to increase gas prices, make more profits out of the sale of gas, and financing the war. So this is just to start providing some of the evidence that you mentioned that prompted me, as well as many other energy experts, to be worried well before the war had started. And this comes together in a context in which clearly we were already putting in place targets to fight climate change. So energy was already high in the agenda, but the war makes it even higher. You asked me about the targets, okay? So the targets, these are moving targets. Luckily, on the upside, we have been updating our targets. And just today, the Council has agreed on a target for renewable energies by 2030, a target that had already been agreed at the Parliament, but it had to be ratified. And the new target is that by 2030, that is in 7 years' time, 42.5% of the total energy that we consume has to come from renewables. Okay, so this is an important target. Not the only one, there's several targets, but typically we talk about three main types of targets. One is renewables, as I already mentioned. The other one is total emissions, and total emissions have to have reduced by 55% with respect to 1990. And we also have targets for energy efficiency that has to improve by 36% by 2030. These are interim targets because really the ultimate goal is that we have to be carbon neutral by 2050. So I hope
could you explain us exactly where is the boundary between renewables and non-renewables?
The boundary, well.
So what counts as renewables, what doesn't? Because some people may not know. So that might be useful to know as well.
Okay, so when we talk about renewable energies, we are talking about solar, photovoltaics, thermosolar, wind. We're also talking about biomass. So biomass is considered to be a renewable energy, even though when we burn the wood in order to produce electricity, we emit CO2 to the atmosphere. But the reason why we consider this to be renewable is because when the trees grow, essentially they're absorbing the CO2, so they are carbon neutral in net terms. Hydro, we also consider this to be renewable, but here we have to make a distinction between big hydro, which is, electricity produced through the hydro reservoirs and a small hydro that is typically run of rivers. So it's, the river flows and there's a small turbine that moved with the water and produces electricity. So what is not renewables? What is not renewables is certainly nuclear, coal, and gas. Those are the main generation sources.
Okay, the other target was on total emissions. So that's that also might be interesting to see. I mean, on the one hand, the EU is producing stuff and the EU is consuming stuff. So what matters? Does the consumption count? Does the production count? How is that calculated?
Is the production. So how much we emit and much we emit when we produce goods and services, when we transport from one place to the other, when we have agriculture, that also is a source of emissions, and those are the three main sources of CO2 emissions.
So that means if you have a lot of outsourcing activities of high energy intensive industries, that can counts towards the reduction of total emissions.
Absolutely, and that's what we refer to as carbon leakage. So when we have a symmetric regulation across different jurisdictions, say Europe and the rest of the world, or some parts of the world, it means that some companies, if we tax carbon in Europe and it is untaxed in other jurisdictions, some companies might have an incentive to move elsewhere, so this would not compute as European emissions. Clearly, carbon leakage is reducing the effectiveness of climate policy, so we have to put in place policies that try to reduce incentives to go abroad, to emit abroad, and there's several of them. A recent one is called the CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. It means that we are taxing the carbon content of all the imports. This means that if you try to go elsewhere to produce so as to escape the carbon tax, and then you want to sell your goods and services in Europe, this is not going to make a difference for you because you're going to be taxed anyway. So this is expected to be a very powerful mechanism to try to avoid carbon leakage. There's other mechanisms. One of them is compensation. So if there are some industries that are considered to have a high risk of carbon leakage, they are compensated. For instance, they are given the carbon permits for free, which is called grandfathering. So if they emit, essentially they don't need to buy those permits because they get them for free. But at the same time, the expectation is that because they have those permits and because they can sell them in the carbon markets, they still face the opportunity cost of polluting.
I guess we could talk a lot about this broad part on emission permits, and I think we could do another fireside talk at some other point. But since we announced to talk about electricity, well, this was energy, and of course electricity somewhere is part of it. Perhaps you could tell us, well, what role does electricity play, in particular also with respect to the decarbonization process?
It's absolutely key. So the power sector is part of the problem because it's one of the heaviest emitters together with transportation and heating. But I would stress the fact that it's really part of the solution. I would say it's the main solution to the decarbonization challenge. And just put it simple, we can have a windmill producing electricity and we can move a car with electricity, but we cannot put a windmill on top of our car and try to push the car with the windmill. This implies that electricity is able to make use of the renewable carbon-free resources to try to feed other sectors of the economy that cannot directly use those renewable energies. In essence, if you want, it is as if electricity was the blood of a decarbonized economy, because it's really the vehicle, it's really the means by which we are going to be able to use renewables across the economy, and that's why it's extremely important that we increase renewable investments in the electricity market. But as important as that is, it's also important that we have a market design, or we have market mechanisms that allow to pass on the lower cost of renewables to electricity prices. Because when we say that the economy has to electrify as a way to decarbonize, this means that the firms and households, we have to make massive investments in changing our equipment. We have to replace our old cars with electric vehicles. We have to replace our gas heating system with electric heat pumps. The industry has to replace the consumption of gas with the consumption of green hydrogen, and so on and so forth. And those investments are very costly, and we are only gonna undertake those investments if it pays off. And one important factor that affects the profitability of these investments is the expected price of electricity. So if electricity remains as expensive as it currently is, people, households, firms, they're not going to make those investments. So these, the blood, electricity is not going to run across the economy. So whether we get electricity prices right, I think is also a very important issue.
I guess we want to talk about this, but for the overall picture, I would like to hear your view on, say, the relative importance of electricity, say, compared to hydrogen, where I guess there are also some bets out there. And of course, there are two, I mean, it's not an either or, I understand it. And it's also sometimes a question of where to get the power, how to get it to somebody and how to store it. So I think there are both aspects to it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not either, it's both. Electricity cannot get everywhere. So there are some processes such as transportation of heavy load, or some industrial processes that really require extremely high temperature. As of today, electricity cannot provide those very high temperatures. We need a gas, and this is where I think hydrogen is going to make a difference. I don't think hydrogen or hydrogen vehicles as of today are expected to win the battle against electric vehicles. I think electric mobility for business as usual cars is gonna win the battle with hydrogen, but hydrogen is gonna be useful in those other processes where electricity cannot reach. In order to produce hydrogen or green hydrogen, we have to use electricity. So the way it works is that we apply an electric current in order to break the molecule of water into hydrogen and oxygen. And this is how we produce hydrogen. Of course, in order to be able to label this hydrogen as green hydrogen, it must be the case that the electricity that we use in this process, which is called electrolysis, is green. Okay, and there is a big discussion, a very exciting discussion, I would say, as to what is really green hydrogen. And currently there's a discussion around three main requirements. One of them is additionality. Okay, so we are producing hydrogen and we are producing it with electricity. It has to be green electricity, but not only that, it has to come from a new renewable plant that would not be there otherwise, because it doesn't make sense to produce electricity out of a renewable power plant if we are not using that renewable power plant to satisfy demand. So it really has to be a new renewable facility. And there's two further requirements which have to do with the spatial and the time correlation. So the electricity has to be produced in the same electricity system as where the electricity is consumed to produce hydrogen. So for instance, it would not make sense to produce renewable electricity in Spain and claim to produce hydrogen in Germany with that electricity. Why? Because the two countries are not tightly interconnected. So it's very likely that if we consume electricity in Germany to produce hydrogen, that electricity is not going to come from the Spanish renewable power plant. So there has to be some spatial correlation, that is both the electricity must be produced close to where the hydrogen is being produced. And this has extremely important implications. For instance, it implies that if we want to produce renewables in Spain, because it's a sunny country, as you can see, we are going through a very long Indian summer. So if we want to produce electricity in Spain, we have to produce hydrogen in Spain. This means that if the German industry wants to consume that hydrogen, we have to transport hydrogen. We cannot transport electricity. We have to transport hydrogen. And as you can imagine, this has very important implications as to the type of infrastructure that we are going to be developing to connect Europe. And this is the consequence of this criterion of spatial correlation.
And in this respect, do you think there's a lot of discussion on these, at least within country, transmission lines for electricity? I guess the plans have been there. It's going slower than planned. What about the infrastructure to transport hydrogen? How are we doing there? Better or worse?
Well, we have not even started. So as you know, there's a plan which is called BARMAR or H2Med, which is a plan to connect Portugal and Spain and France through an underwater pipeline only for dedicated to hydrogen, connecting Barcelona and Marseille, and from Marseille up to Germany. So essentially now we are drawing the hydrogen backbone network, but we are not still there. As you say, even with the electricity infrastructure, we are extremely slow. So the interconnection between Spain and as you know, Spain, Portugal, and Europe is extremely weak. And I believe there's very strong gains from trade if we manage to develop that infrastructure. The interconnection is extremely relevant for many issues, but let me stress two. One of them is security of supply. We have seen during the energy crisis that when we are interconnected, we manage to face the energy shocks in a better way. So, when it comes to gas, as you know, Germany didn't have LNG terminals to bring liquefied natural gas from third parties. In Spain, we have 6 LNG terminals on the coast. This means that the boats can come from anywhere in the world to Spain, and we can make use of that gas. Yet we have a bottleneck on the Pyrenees because that gas could not really go to where it was most needed, which was in Central Europe. So had we had more interconnection capacity, we would have been able to withstand the shock in a better way. The same thing happens with electricity, and it's even, I would say, it's even more important because when with electricity, as you know, we have to consume it whenever it is produced, and we have renewables in the electricity market, and the availability of renewables is intermittent. This means that they are not always available. The sun shines only during the day, and the wind does not always blow. So we have to make sure that we have enough demand to absorb all the supply, and at the same time we need to have enough supply to cover demand. So when we put the countries together, some of these shocks are negatively correlated, so we're able to make a better use of renewable energy. So it's really a very effective way both to promote security of supply, reduce the need of storage, and at the same time make better use of renewable electricity. So just last week, I was in Chile. In Chile, they have a very severe problem regarding this because they have in the north, they have the Atacama Desert, which is extremely sunny. It's one of the best places in the world to produce solar energy. But all the demand, most of the demand is in the south, where Santiago and the industry is, and they have a very weak interconnection between the north and the south. Prices in the north are, during 8 months per year, equal to 0 because there's so much solar production that cannot be absorbed by demand that in essence there's excess supply. And in the south, prices are well above 150 euro per megawatt hour. That's a clear case in which interconnection allows to improve efficiency of the whole system, and something similar, probably less stark as what happens in Chile, but similar in nature is what occurs in Europe. We would be more efficient together. We would be better able to integrate renewables into the European electricity market if we developed the interconnections, both electric as well as hydrogen.
So I guess so that's a call for strengthening these transmission links. I guess to a certain extent, you could also say, well, there may also be some industry relocation. And in particular, that there has been a discussion, well, as long as the transmission links are not there or if they are blocked, I mean, there are price signals also for relocating industrial activity. And so what is the role of prices and where does the role of prices in your view fail? I mean, where do we need more than just those price signals?
I think that is a great question, but I don't think it has been studied enough. The other day I was talking to somebody and precisely he was asking me, has this been studied? The fact that can demand move where cheap electricity is, and I don't think it has been studied. So whoever is interested is welcome. I think there's a lot of inertia and there's many frictions in the industry moving from one place to the other. So if the industry could move just following where lower electricity prices are, then we should start seeing many more industry coming to Southern Europe where future electricity prices are expected to be lower because of increased renewable penetration and weak interconnection. And this is not really something that we are seeing, probably because there's many other factors beyond energy costs that matter for location decisions. And on top of this, of course, governments try to do their best so as not to lose their industries. So on top of the pricing provided by future electricity prices that differ across locations, there's state aids, there's subsidies, and many other elements that, on top of all the other factors that affect location decisions, also distort the efficient location decisions. So absolutely, you're right. One would have to do a cost-benefit analysis. Do we want to develop the infrastructure? Do we want to foster a reallocation of industry across Europe? I'm not sure whether this cost-benefit analysis would be very influential. I think countries are going to do their best to try to keep their jobs and their industry under their own jurisdictions. In any case, households live where they are. They are certainly an important part of total demand. They are not going to move, and we have to make sure that at every moment of time they can consume electricity where it's the cheapest, and that's why we have to connect markets. And by the way, there's an additional reason which I didn't mention, which is the bigger the markets, the more competitive they're going to be. So I think competition issues also call for an attempt to widen the size of the market, and when it comes to energy, really this infrastructure is required.
So where are the biggest needs in your view in strengthening those transmission lines? So I guess there on the one hand, so from a European perspective, so there are the Pyrenees, and so essentially the connection between the Hispanic Peninsula and the rest of Europe is pretty weak. My understanding is also that the Alps are a certain hurdle. So are those the ones, or is it to start first at a more smaller scale and get things within the country working well? What are the right priorities, or you say it has to be done all at the same time to?
Again, I think it's both. So within the countries, there are some pockets of local market power, or some markets that are not connected with the rest because there's congestion, and there we have some competition problems because there's some firms in those areas that essentially become monopolies because they're the only ones that can satisfy local demand. So this is an important source of market power, and increasing one, by the way. But also clearly there's interconnection problems, as you just said, between Spain, Portugal, and Europe, and also the Italian border. And one can see this very clearly by looking at the map of prices. So it's very often the case that prices across Europe converge essentially to a single number, whereas prices in the Iberian Peninsula and in Italy get disconnected from the rest of the continent. And of course, I didn't mention the UK. But that's an issue. That's an issue as well.
So I hear, and I'm not sure to what extent Germany is special, but there are often local oppositions to those transmission lines. And it's in a way also reasonable because the beneficiaries are often not those local communities, but they are further down the line, so to speak. Yeah. And what are your views? I mean, is this an important policy topic? And what should be, if so, what should be done about it?
I think it's a key topic. We sometimes, not always, but we sometimes forget about the socioeconomic implications of all these investments and the winners and the losers. And it's absolutely critical, not just because we are concerned about justice, but also because if we do not address the opposition of those who feel that they are losing, simply these policies or these investments are not going to take place. And this applies to transmission lines, but it also applies to renewables. I'm extremely concerned about this becoming the local opposition. I mean, this becoming a true bottleneck for the deployment of renewable energies. And this is happening across Europe, and not only across Europe, but also beyond in the States and so on and so forth. The Not in My Backyard movement is becoming very successful in blocking many of these projects, and I think the question is not saying, you know, this is too bad, you know, we have to no, we have to try to understand why do people oppose these projects, and probably it's for the reason that you just mentioned. They suffer the cost, and they don't enjoy any part of the benefits. So I was talking to an architect who is dealing with land planning and so on and so forth. She lives in Portugal, and she was telling me, you know, in this village, people are extremely upset because they have a forest, and they used to go for a walk in the forest, and now the forest is no longer there because they built major solar power plants. So if I lived in that village, I would also complain. So these people, these local people, they don't seem to be getting any of the benefits of these developments, yet they're suffering some of the cost. So I think our job as economists is to try to highlight this and try to promote public policies that help rebalance or reach a better balance in the cost and in the cost burden and the benefits of these projects. I have a recent paper in which we try to look at whether the local municipalities where the renewable investments take place benefit in terms of jobs. So we exploit the variation of across time and across space of all the renewable projects that have taken place in Spain during the last 15 years to try to identify whether these projects have created local employment and whether they have contributed to reducing jobs. And we see that the effects are weak. Certainly for wind, there are zero. For solar, there are some positive local impacts, but for wind, there are zero. And why is it the case? It's the case because really in the municipalities where these investments take place, very often there's not enough workers. These workers don't have the necessary skills. Some of the jobs required for the construction and maintenance of these plants require highly skilled workers that really live in the capital, and they move from one side to the other. So the municipalities really do not benefit, not even through the local job market. They benefit very little through the local taxes that these projects pay, but we also look at public finances, and we don't see that these projects imply before and after in the local finances of these municipalities that would, for instance, allow them to build the schools or health centers.
So what's your view? Is this essentially then the job of, say, national governments or even of the EU and the Commission to develop some, in a way, compensation schemes? Or where should be the responsibility? Or in Spain, is it the comunidades, autonomous regions, or in Germany, the Länder? So where do you think the responsibility should sit?
I think it should be across the board. I think the European Commission should probably play an important role in at least drafting guidelines as to what these public policies should be. Governments, you know, I'm not an expert in public policies or in local finance, but I understand that governments might put in place local taxes, but also local benefits. So the other day I was talking in Spain. They have created an institute which is called the Institute of the Just Transition. They try to put in place industry in those places where the coal power plants are phasing out, but they are also very concerned now about the opposition against renewables, and they're trying to think about policies that could be in place to share these benefits. And one of the ideas that they are considering, and they are not the only ones, this is an idea that is being discussed elsewhere, is whether the residents can get access to cheaper electricity, because it would be a way of trying to, it's not just about the benefits, it's also about people understanding that the benefits come from the fact that they have a solar power plant in their backyard. So it's important that people perceive that the benefits are linked to the cost. So if they get access to cheaper electricity, also probably some other businesses will locate in the municipality, and this will attract more activity and so on and so forth. So, you know, there's I think there's policies both on the cost side, the taxes, but also on the benefit side for the households directly. But probably the local, you know, the institutions, or, you know, the regional governments, or that are closer to people, they clearly have an important role to play, because, you know, they are closer to where people are and where the municipalities are. So probably this is a policy that has to encompass different layers of the institutions, from supranational to the very local level. But certainly, I think it's a priority. And you started talking about this regarding transmission. But again, it affects transmission, it affects renewables, probably it affects hydrogen pipelines, and many other infrastructures that we have to put in place if we really need to decarbonize our economies. Let's not forget that this is really an investment process. Many new infrastructures will have to be put in place, and this can create winners and losers.
And I guess another one which also plays a role, and then we're moving back more closely to electricity markets, is storage, where there may also be opposition, by having using water as an intermediate step of storing, in a way, energy, and then feeding it back into the grid whenever it's needed.
Yeah, storage is another ingredient of this, you know, big puzzle, this big challenge. I think storage has to play a key role. By the way, it's complementary. We were talking about interconnection before. It's complementary, but not fully with interconnection. And again, the other day I was in Chile. I was discussing about this, whether, you know, the problem that they have between the north and the south, whether this could be solved with the storage. And not really. The reason is, in the north, they have zero prices across the board. So storing electricity there doesn't really make a difference, because you're going to store when it's very cheap at the price of zero. But the value of what you're storing is also zero, because if prices are flat across the day, then storage is not going to give you the solution. Only interconnection, because it's really across you know, regions in which there's
right. I mean, there you mentioned the regional difference, and then there are the intermittency issues, and there storage can play a role.
So really, storage plays a role when across time there's important price differences reflecting important cost differences. So the business model of a storage is to buy electricity when it's cheap, and sell it when it is expensive. And in markets in which there's a lot of renewables, we can have these price differences that become wider and wider. So storage will be able to reduce production costs, because it's replacing costly electricity with electricity which is less costly, sometimes even electricity that would be lost, because at times when there's a lot of renewable electricity, sometimes it's even exceeds demand. So sometimes storage allows to make use of electricity that would otherwise be lost. And it also contributes to improving security of supply, because in electricity, we always need to have enough supply to cover demand. So we have a storage facility, we are reducing the need of having installed capacity to meet the peaks of demand. So again, storage is a win-win story. Where's the problem? Well, the problem is still in the investment cost. The cost of investing in storage have been declining quite a lot, mainly due to learning by doing, but still we are not there. So if storage had to finance itself through the arbitrage profits that it makes in the electricity market, it would not yet break even. So if we want at this stage to promote the storage, we have to provide capacity payments, so they get this missing money that they don't get in the electricity market. And the question is, what is the best way to determine these capacity payments? We might be paying a lot if we as regulator don't really know what the cost of the investments is, as it happened with renewables. And this gave rise to very large payments to renewables that were not really needed, or we might end up paying too little and storage is not going to develop. So probably the best way to do it is to use auctions, a mechanism to try to obtain this information from the investors. So whoever is willing to develop a storage in exchange for the lowest capacity payment is the one that should be able to develop it. So again, market mechanisms and regulatory design are extremely important to push the agenda forward, hopefully at least cost for the rest of us.
And I guess the complementary to storage, there's also the question how to adjust to a certain extent, at least demand related to intermittency. So I guess that's part of the smart metering attempts. What is, from your point of view, the role of, how much can we rely on prices there? Because for prices to work, they must be fluctuating a lot, and consumers, especially those with a low income, that may be a very high risk in a way for them if prices just move. So to what extent do you think we can rely on prices there, or do we need other instruments which help us steer demand?
I think prices can help, but they are not a silver bullet. And you mentioned the reasons why. There are some customers that are flexible. They are able to shift demand from high price periods to low price periods. This might be the case of part of the industry, but a large part of demand, certainly including households, but also another part of the industry and the service sector. So think, for instance, of a store. A store cannot open and close the doors depending on electricity prices. Their electricity demand is very price inelastic, and that's the same. That's the case also for other types of industry, but also for households. We have limited ability to change our consumption patterns in response to prices, and we are not sufficiently informed. We are not aware that sometimes prices change. And even if we were informed and we were aware, price differences rarely are large enough for us to really make it worth it to follow prices and try to adjust our consumption accordingly. I think there's some hope that in the future, not really smart meters. Of course, if we want to charge as a function of hourly consumption, we need a smart meter. But a smart meter is really a dumb meter in the sense that all they do is they meter, right? But they, as of now, they do not allow to adjust our consumption. But there's other automatic devices that allow us, we remain passive, and they allow to adjust the consumption of our household to prices. They can be connected to the internet, get the price information, and therefore have some elasticity. I think there's some hope there. But yet, even if we really exploit all the opportunities for demand response at the household level, I think part of the problem will remain. We have to do as much as we can regarding or promoting demand response, but we have to do much more than that because that is not going to take us there. Storage, interconnection, renewables, you mentioned all of them. I think you touched the key elements already, and we have to try to make progress in all those fronts beyond demand response, for sure.
I think very close. Yeah.
Hi, Martin. Sorry, I'm trying to. I have a recent working paper with Marvel Wands and other co-authors in which we look at the distributional implications of real-time pricing, that is hourly pricing. So beyond the question of whether they promote demand response or not, real-time pricing also has winners and losers, because different type of electricity consumers, we consume electricity at different moments of time. We have different equipment that implies that some people consume electricity during the winter, others consume electricity mostly during the summer, and so on and so forth. So when we move from a system of time invariant prices, as it is the case in most countries, to one in which we start paying real-time prices reflecting the changes in the hourly cost of producing electricity, there are some households that are going to lose and some households that are going to win. And in that paper, we do precisely that. And we find in the Spanish context that the switch to real-time pricing was slightly regressive. Because in essence, in Spain, prices tend to be higher during winter, when there's more demand. And in Spain, the lower income households, they tend to have electric heating because electric heating requires less investment than central heating or gas heating and so on and so forth. So when we move people from time invariant prices to real-time prices, it was really the low income households, the one that were hit most by those price spikes during the winter. So this is also something important that we have to keep in mind.
Which does not imply that you're against real-time pricing, but that policy should think about the consequences and possibly find, say, compensation mechanisms.
Absolutely, absolutely. So again, it's not that I'm against real-time pricing. I'm just simply warning the demand response that we can get out of it is not very large. And yet, even if it's little, it is valuable, but we have to put in place other compensating mechanisms so that we are not creating an equity problem because we have to improve efficiency a tiny little bit. So also in the paper, we propose a two-part tariff scheme so that the fixed fee is inversely related to income. So in a way, households that would keep the hourly price signal, yet we would be able to mitigate or hopefully offset the income effects of the policy change. I think this is something that at least it should be clear. We don't have to compromise equity because we want to put forward efficiency measures, and vice versa. The fact that we want to put in place efficient measures doesn't have to make us forget about the impacts on equity. And again, it's not just because we care about social justice, but also because we want those policies to take place. And if we don't care about the distributional implications, some of the policies are not going to happen. So we have to design policies keeping both objectives in mind.
I guess the equity part is less of an issue for the business users, but I think they have been very much in the focus recently, that some have been warning, but of course there are always warnings. The question is how serious they are, but there's a discussion of providing, well, in general, there's a tradition of providing lower electricity prices to industrial users, or at least to certain industrial users. What's your view on this? Also, if you think about more the overall idea of how should these electricity markets be designed, what kind of price signals should users have?
That's a very difficult question to answer, Martin, and one that is certainly, very heatedly debated these days among member states. We have market mechanisms that create prices, and the issue is who's going to pay those prices. That's one important issue. A previous issue is whether the prices that those markets are delivering create or have good properties in terms of the distribution implications, mainly between consumers and producers. So let me discuss these two issues one at a time. Electricity prices in wholesale electricity markets that are set at the price of the most expensive electricity plant that is needed to cover demand. That is typically nowadays the price of producing electricity with gas. And the marginal cost of gas generation is completely unrelated to the average cost of all the other technologies, including nuclear, hydro, and also renewables. In our textbook model, in which there's free entry, clearly free entry does the trick, because if the price in that market is above the average cost of all the other technologies, then there's going to be entry in the technology that is more profitable. If some of the inframarginal technologies, they make a loss, there's going to be exit until that loss disappears. So we look at the a simple model with free entry. Current electricity markets provides the right price signal, and they do not create any problems regarding the issue of whether we are paying too much or too little to the producers. We are just paying just enough. The problem is that there's no free entry in electricity market, so these type of adjustments cannot take place, at least not in a very rapid way. So we can find ourselves as last year, also this year, that's still the case. Gas prices are not as high as last year, but they're still twice as high as the historical average. Then we can find ourselves that the marginal cost of producing electricity with gas is paying too much to some other producers, again, nuclear, hydro, and some renewables. This means that there's an important wealth transfer from consumers to firms, because consumers are paying well above the average cost of those technologies. So this is where the first distributional issue arises. And I'm mentioning this because this is also part of the current debate as to what is the price that industrial consumers should be paying. The French government claims that they have nuclear power, so why not give access to their industry and their electricity consumers at prices that reflect the average cost of their nuclear power stations? And the average cost of the nuclear power stations is well below the current electricity market prices that we are paying in all the other countries, in which we are paying all the electricity as if it was just produced by gas. Is it a subsidy, the fact that French want to set electricity tariffs covering the cost of nuclear? Well, some countries claim that this is a subsidy. Why? Because French electricity consumers have access to electricity at prices below the electricity market prices. So we are in this discussion as to whether we should move forward with the electricity market reform or not, and there's a strong disagreement between mainly the French and the German as to whether this is a subsidy or whether this is not a subsidy. So this is the way the French want to help the industry. Other countries, and this has been traditionally the case in Germany, have tried, but not only in Germany, in many other countries as well, have tried to benefit industrial consumers so as to protect competitiveness by allowing them to buy electricity at prices below the prices that households buy electricity. This is a zero-sum game. So if the industry pays less, this means that somebody else is going to have to pay more. At the end of the day, is the industrial policy of a country, but I think it's also an important issue within the European Union, because if we allow some member states to subsidize electricity for the industry, this might be considered a state aid and create distortions across member states. So this is a very tricky issue. Again, it has to do with the second issue as to who is paying what in the electricity system, but it's also related to the type of market arrangements that we have in place, in which we are paying the marginal cost of electricity generation, which is unrelated to the average cost. So I leave this question here in the floor. I think an important issue that we have to agree on is what is truly a subsidy. Are the French subsidizing electricity because they're given access to electricity at prices that reflect average cost, or is this not a subsidy? I think this should be a very important issue that we should clarify.
Well, I guess there's also the question of, well, how is energy produced? And some large companies have their big plants with their own power plants. So they essentially are relying less on electricity provided through the system. Whereas if you're a small company, you don't have that option. So I guess there could also be the question of how to deal with small versus big industry. Have you any thoughts on that?
Well, that is true, but electricity markets, they provide an opportunity cost. So if an industry, I don't know, if a big firm is able to produce electricity at their premises, what is the cost of that electricity? Really the true cost that they incur, or the opportunity cost because they could be selling that electricity into the grid and make the profit? I'm not sure that's really what is truly making the difference. Honestly, is
Okay.
this what I mean?
Yes, I guess the question is both as a consumer of electricity, meaning a business consumer of electricity, if there's tariff differentiation, that of course affects incentives, but of course this also applies if you feed into the grid. And I guess one constraint should be that one does not favor a certain type of firm, say a large firm which can run its own integrated services compared to a firm which cannot. And I guess that's another constraint which would need to be considered, or which is to be considered when looking at the tariff system.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is critical. What I tend to say is that the best way to support the European industry, for sure, energy cost is an extremely important factor. The best way that we can do is provide or rely on market mechanisms that make sure that we, and when I say we, all of us, industry and consumers, pay electricity at prices that reflect their true cost. And if we do that, there's going to be less need to subsidize the industry because they're not going to be paying electricity at extremely high prices. And honestly, this is what has happened during the energy crisis. And I think the energy crisis has shown that we are very vulnerable to the type of electricity market arrangements that we have. Governments have been supporting the industry, paying large fractions of the GDP in form of state aid to try to shield consumers from increases in electricity prices. Yet at the same time, they were doing very little to stop the large electricity firms from making profits they never dreamt of. And this sentence, profits they never dreamt of, it was Ursula von der Leyen who said that in the State of the Union speech in September 2002. So the European Commission is absolutely aware that the profits that some of these firms, electricity firms, have been making have been well beyond their expectations. And yet it has been required that governments, through public resources, have spent their money to support the industry to avoid these high costs. Yet the companies were still making those profits, even though we all agreed that those profits were not justified. They were above any legitimate expectation. So this is where I think we have failed. I think it's absolutely important that the industry pays prices that reflect cost, not below cost, not above cost. But if we want to make sure that prices reflect cost, we have to rely on other type of market arrangements because the current ones that we have are not doing the job.
I was just looking at the time. I thought we had still a lot to go, but actually we almost talked for 1 hour. And you will be around for questions and chats after the recordings, but still within the recording, I have one last question to you. So we started the conversation about the shock the Russian war in Ukraine has created also to electricity markets. Of course, there are many other shocks we're not talking about here. And there's the decarbonization objective as a long-run goal around. In the medium to long term, do you think this shock of the war has made the path easier towards the decarbonization process or more difficult?
I'm not sure, Martin. I wish I could say, the bottle is half empty or half full, but every day I change my mind regarding this. I think there's been changes in opposite directions. On the one hand, we have realized that relying on renewables reduces our dependency on imported fossil fuels. So in a way, also through the Repower EU policy, we have fostered the deployment of renewable energy. So I think this goes in the right direction. On the other hand, we are developing more gas infrastructure, more LNG terminals, and we want to make sure that we have long-term contracts for gas, so that we won't run out of gas. And to be honest, the shock has been huge, but I'm not sure that the response or the long-lasting response to the shock give us good reasons to be optimistic. So I think the energy transition in the power sector is going to take place, that's for sure, but it has to do more with the economics of renewable energies whose costs have really gone down. I'm not sure this is a process that has really been triggered fully, at least by the energy crisis. So let me not be optimistic, not be pessimistic. Let's see what happens in the future. In any case, we are gonna make it if we manage to come up with new materials, new technologies that allow to reduce the cost of producing carbon-free electricity. Otherwise, we are not going to make it.
Thanks, Natalia, for this, well, not too pessimistic and not too optimistic closing words. And thanks a lot for the whole conversation. Thanks to all the participants who were joining. And I hope that you had an interesting time here at the Fireside Talk.
Yeah, time went very fast. Thank you, Martin.